Welcome everyone, this is On Just Restart. I am joined by my good friend Shifty from his channel. I am Shifty, or it's Shifty, because it's different on Twitter versus YouTube, but it will be linked in the description below. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, and you know, Twitter won't let me have my name, so that's why Twitter is the way it is at this time.
Yeah, but you know, Shifty makes Nintendo content too, so you know, definitely check him out. But today, what we're going to be doing is talking about Breath of the Wild 2 again. And we will continue to talk about Breath of the Wild 2 because I hope and believe it's going to be the bee's knees. And we're thinking, a lot of people are, that we are on the cusp of a lot of Breath of the Wild 2 news. So basically, rumor has it, from many different rumor givers who have good track records, that we're getting a direct this week. And this direct will give us Twilight Princess and Wind Waker HD as announced games, but also apparently a title drop for Breath of the Wild 2. And when we consider that the game is currently slated for spring 2023, and when we consider the history of Nintendo releasing games to close out the fiscal year, which is March, it's sort of lining up for us to think that, okay, the game may be coming out this March. And if that's the case, they basically need to start talking about it with a September Nintendo Direct. So from a timing perspective, from what people are saying with rumors, there's like this widespread belief that we're getting like that initial blowout of information, like maybe like a significant trailer, maybe more. So what we're talking about today is sort of what we think we're going to see from this Nintendo Direct in relation to Breath of the Wild 2. That's the focus for this discussion. But before we jump right into things, because I know this is just kind of like a common talking point, we already had a discussion on this last week with Nintendo Prime, so check that out. I won't give you my opinion on it, because my opinion's on it in the previous video, but I'm going to ask Shifty what he thinks. So Shifty, when do you think Breath of the Wild 2 is going to come out?
It's kind of hard to make a prediction for me anyways, because it's hard to know what info is going to be like totally accurate, right? But I kind of want to say it's going to be early for sure. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if they do March, but March also seems very, I want to say safe, and knowing Nintendo, I always want to predict like the random element in there too. Like the most random side, because Nintendo does that. Nintendo does not like to do the most predictable of things. So until we were like, you know what, they're not, they're you know, they're just, when we think that they're gonna do something random, that's when they're predictable, and that's because at that point they became unpredictable. Right. I think like the only, I guess, property you could say that is predictable is maybe Pokemon, considering it's a yearly thing. Oh yeah, right? And even Pokemon's, then they don't even really make it themselves.
Yeah, like they definitely threw us for a loop with Legends Arceus and Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl. Like that was definitely a pattern change.
Yeah, especially like Arceus just seemed like it was just wedged in the middle of like two other unrelated games. It was nuts, and
right? It might be the best one of them all. We'll see.
Well, yeah, probably, and that's a whole other discussion for another day.
A whole other one.
But the thing is that I want to say March because it's safe, right? But part of me is also because Nintendo is not exactly the safest company sometimes. They're kind of random. But I also can't think of another time that would make sense to me.
Right, like, I mean, while there may be a perceived randomness to what they do, there is logic behind what they do. We may not understand that logic, and maybe it's not always the most logical, but there is some logic, right? They have executives and professionals that make these decisions. They come to some sort of conclusion that it will be an effective strategy for their business. So, you know, given the March makes sense. Like, it makes sense, right? So if it's not ready for the holiday, might as well get it out before the fiscal year is closing, right? Unless it's not ready, unless there's another reason. But for now, since Nintendo has told us spring, that's kind of like, you know, where I think a lot of people stand.
It's the safe estimate to make, right?
Yeah.
It's the safe option, and that's mostly the reason why I'm going with it, even if there's the possibility that Nintendo might, you know, break all expectations and do something totally off the wall for whatever reason.
To kind of, all right, so I feel like we got your perspective on it, but because we've already done a discussion on it, I don't want to dwell on it for too long, right?
Right.
But, with that in mind, though, right, kind of starting to actually delve into what they may show off in this potential direct. By the way, do you believe we're getting a direct?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, all right, cool. So we're on the same page there. When we get this direct, right, what do you think they're going to show off there? Like, do you think they're going to give us a release date? Like, are they going to confirm our beliefs? Or are they going to throw us for a loop again and say it's actually coming out in 2025? Or are they going to tell us the Breath of the Wild 2 we've been waiting for all this time has been in our hands this whole time? It's called Breath of the Wild 1. And it's just DLC.
That'd be like if most people probably wouldn't get this, but Don Matrick of old Xbox, like if he was in Nintendo, that's what they would say. They would say that last one.
Wow.
But I think it's very likely we'll see a release date. But I also feel that if they don't show a release date in this September Direct, they have to do it at the Game Awards, right? Like, does that make sense?
Yeah. So my perspective has been this. I think I can say with some level of confidence, not a lot, because you never know with Nintendo, to your point, we're getting at least a name reveal. But if we look at how they at least handled Breath of the Wild, we got the name reveal, but we didn't get the release date yet. Now, the interesting difference there is that back then, Breath of the Wild was being made for the Wii U, and we suspected, we learned before the name drop that Breath of the Wild would also be coming to the NX. At the time, the Switch was called the NX. We didn't know what it was going to be. And I think that report came out in April of 2016. Then in June of 2016, we had E3, where we got the first full-length feature trailer, not just a tease for Breath of the Wild, and that's where we got the name reveal. But we still didn't have a solid release date. And then we didn't get that solid release date until the January Switch presentation, and that's when they confirmed the date for March 3 of 2017. Now, I think we could see a similar sort of window there. Now, I could see them maybe giving us a release date, if not in this Direct. Maybe they save that for perhaps the Game Awards. But also maybe there's like a Zelda Direct or some sort of presentation in January where they confirm it. So it's like very similar to how they treated Breath of the Wild 1. But keep in mind, there was a Switch presentation in January because there's a Switch. It was a brand new generation, right? I don't think we're going to get a Switch 2 presentation next January in a few months from now. I don't think that's where we're at. So I don't think it's going to be exactly the same. But I do feel like we're definitely getting a name reveal this September Direct, and potentially a release date at the same time. But maybe they do wait a little bit. Maybe they save it as a release date announcement trailer at the Game Awards, or maybe they wait until, say, January or maybe early February where they have a Direct it's hard for me to believe that they would get all the way to like February before giving us a release date for Breath of the Wild 2, Like that's,
Nintendo has a
assuming
history
it's coming
sometimes.
out March. That's assuming it comes out March. So
they do have a history of kind of like keeping release dates kind of close to the chest sometimes.
Yeah.
Like they keep it very close to themselves. But I do think that when it comes to their much larger, higher budget properties, I think they were going to want to have that out a little earlier than they normally do, right? I don't see them doing it a month prior. Like, I think that's a little too
and
close to it.
I even want to argue that for Breath of the Wild, we found out a bit late. Like, we learned about it in January when it was coming out early March. Not even late March, like early March, right? Like, so we had a 2-month gap there or something like that. I think it was less than a 2-month gap. Yeah, for sure. I have to double check the Switch presentation, but I'm pretty sure they didn't have it on January 3rd. So, less than 2 months. I don't think that's going to happen again. So,
I don't see that happening. I think that was a special occasion considering that it was the reveal of the Switch, basically, and the whole next generation Nintendo console. Considering that this isn't really the same situation in that end, I can see them going for the Game Awards because that's only like a month before that happened.
Yeah.
Like it's a little, and
it's another like
it's a little closer.
It's like another big like sort of like thing to show off about the game.
Right.
at a big event to kind of like space out big announcements.
Yeah.
Because like, I mean, they could, like, I think there's a good chance we get like a something Breath of the Wild to the Game Awards just because it's coming out really soon, regardless if we get a release or like a release date in this direct. But think about how much more impactful that Game Awards trailer would be if it comes with the release date. You know, like I want the release date now just because I want to just feel comfortable about when it's coming. But I think it makes more sense to save the release date for another event, just to have like another thing. Because like they could give us another trailer at the Game Awards and just show more stuff about the game, and that'll be fine. But wouldn't it be more impactful if it also was paired with a release date? You know. So I don't. Yeah. I'm a bit divided on whether we get it by in the September Direct or by like say maybe the Game Awards. But I feel like it's a relatively safe expectation to think we get the release date before early January. At least that's what I think. I think we're gonna get it before early January, assuming it's coming out in March. If it's coming out later, we can wait later.
Yeah. If that's the case, I was originally thinking that it would just be at the Game Awards. That's kind of my original assumption that would be the case. September specifically, that's just I kind of agree with you. I think that's going to be the time you would get a name reveal, especially considering that you mentioned the fact that they kind of already did that with the first Breath of the Wild game. I can see them doing that again. The only way I see them not showing the game in this September Direct is if they want it to be one big blowout moment, where they would have it maybe it's for the Game Awards, maybe it's some other direct, maybe in January or so, where they would just do everything at once. Like, here's the name drop, here's the release date, here's everything about this game, here's the big, blowout moment kind of thing, right? I just don't think Breath of the Wild 2 should only get one moment, you know? Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I mean, think about all the big games that have come out from Nintendo. They get more than one moment. Splatoon 3, which has just come out, like I feel like that's gotten multiple moments, right? It's had multiple direct showings. It had its own direct. Like, I think Breath of the Wild 2 deserves something like that. Smash had multiple Smash directs. Mario Odyssey had the initial teaser. It had a trailer in January. Had a trailer at E3, and then it came out, right? Like, and then obviously Breath of the Wild had it had E3 all to itself in 2016, but it also had multiple trailers after that too. So, I mean, it had a Game Awards like Treehouse, like I think Breath of the Wild deserves more. Breath of the Wild 2 deserves more than like just one day of news. I get you. And that's why I think it's much more likely that we'll see it in this direct, like in this September Direct. I mean, I don't see them doing a situation where they don't show it because they want to have like a bigger blowout later kind of thing. Unless there's some reason for them to delay the game again, I don't really see that happen. But if they're having a situation where they feel like they need to delay the game again for whatever particular reason, then maybe you'll see that game, much later in like future, like next year directs, that sort of thing. But I want to say I'm somewhat expecting the game to be shown at this direct. Like I'm expecting it there. I just don't expect the release date. I think that'll be like a two-step thing. Because I feel if they don't show the game here, they'll show it later. As long as there's no announcement of a delay of any kind, I'm expecting that to be the case, like a two-step process, because you have a direct in September, you have Game Awards in December. It just seems like it works out perfectly, unless there's a reason to have the game be shown later, which to me would mean like a delay of some kind. That doesn't mean if it doesn't show up here, it's going to be delayed, right? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that could mean that, but they could also decide to do a big blowout thing.
Let me just tell you, if Breath of the Wild 2 is not at this direct, I think for sure it's not coming out March. Like, it's coming out way later. Like, I have a hard time believing Nintendo would skip a general Nintendo Direct if a game's coming out in March. Like, I just don't see that happening.
I don't.
Quick
for
thing.
Me, I think
we don't even have to edit this out. I'm just letting in my cat Ruby because she's clawing at the door. So that's totally fine. You can continue talking.
She wants in on the discussion.
Just give me 1 second. I'm doing it. Okay. Hold on. Come in. Come on, hurry up. You realize now I have to put you on camera, right?
Oh no.
Why is he ruining this discussion? Is it my cat? You haven't seen her before. Okay, you're good.
You're saying with that, you just tripled your views.
Maybe.
But yeah, I think my patience is maybe a little bit stronger, just a smidgen, because my last chance scenario in my brain is the Game Awards. Because I feel like it's still, maybe it's unlikely, but I do think it's somewhat possible for them to attempt a big blowout kind of moment at the Game Awards. But I do not see that being the likely scenario. I see it more likely they do like a two-pronged attack kind of thing where they have it at September, they have it at the Game Awards, and then they, kind of just advertise the game until it releases in March.
Right now, what I'm thinking is that we get the September Direct. It's gonna be like a legitimate trailer. Like, I'm not saying it's gonna be like 20 minutes are gonna be dedicated to just Breath of the Wild 2, but I think we're getting like an actual like feature-length trailer. Like, it's gonna be like at least 3 minutes long, and it's gonna give us the name reveal. I think I'm fine. I'm coming to terms that we're probably not getting the release date this week. I think you're probably right. Maybe we get that, say, at the Game Awards. So there'll be like another smaller trailer at the Game Awards with the release date, and then I think we get an actual like Breath of the Wild 2 Direct maybe early next year, say January. And then it comes out in March. And if there is like some sort of Switch hardware, be it like a Breath of the Wild 2 OLED or whatever, like maybe if there's like a, like a mid-gen refresh or maybe Switch, whatever it is, if there's something, they make that announcement just coming out at the same time, like, a month or so before it actually comes out.
I think that's likely. I think I'm being somewhat hopeful that if they don't show it this September, that they'll do like a big blowout kind of thing, but that's not what I really believe to be the case. And that's just if worst case scenario, I don't see it in this direct.
Yeah, I guess basically I just don't really see a scenario where Nintendo doesn't talk about Breath of the Wild 2 soon. Like, I just don't see that happening. Like, they would have to announce that it's coming. Like, if it's not showing up in the direct, it has to come alongside some sort of announcement that, hey, I'm sorry, we're taking even longer than we thought, or like, hey, it's coming out like the end of spring, like June, which would just be bonkers. But we'll see what happens. But going beyond, like a release date, what else do you think we could see from this direct? Like, do you think it's gonna be a trailer, like I said, or do you think it's gonna be something bigger? Like, what do you think it is going to be in this direct relating to Breath of the Wild?
I think you're somewhat right. I think we'll see like a full trailer of the game. But I do believe that this trailer is not going to show everything to expect from this game.
There's no way.
Yeah, there's no way. I don't see them showing off all new, like, let's say all new mechanics or all the new locations or anything like that. What I see them doing is maybe showing more of what the framing device of the game will be, like the story, like how they're framing the story of this game, basically. What I'm trying to say.
Okay.
That's what I see them doing. Mostly because I think the last time we saw the game, it was essentially just teasing the story of how, like, what happened.
Yeah, right now we're just trying to piece together what's going on, right? Like now it's like a big mystery.
Yeah, and I think they're gonna kind of go into that further. I feel like they're gonna want the much larger scale adventure like gameplay mechanics and world kind of trailer. I think that's the trailer they will show at the Game Awards. That's what I see happening. Mostly because I could be wrong with this. After all, I'm not like a industry analyst, but I feel like if you're going to show a trailer at a Nintendo Direct, where it's primarily Nintendo fans watching it, they're going to be more interested in like the story aspect of the game, where they want to know what's happening next, right? They're dedicated fans who's played the first one most likely, who are going to want to know what happens next, right? While I feel like the more general world, like seeing the beauty of the world, what you can do in that world, the gameplay mechanics, I feel like that's something that appeals to the more general audience. Something that you would want to show at the Game Awards, where it's more than just Nintendo fans.
I think that sounds logical. But I also feel like you'll agree with this point that even if that is largely the case, we're still getting gameplay. in this direct.
Yeah.
Like we're still gonna get gameplay details during this direct. It's not gonna be 100% story. And I actually wouldn't be surprised if Eiji Aonuma comes out on some sort of stage, not on stage, but you know how they do like the green screen thing, during the direct, and he actually has some things to say about Breath of the Wild too. Like he talks about, oh, like this is the inspiration for it. You know, there's a few cool mechanics we've been working on. Take a look, or like we're gonna learn about some mechanics. We're gonna see a little bit more about the world. Maybe they give us a better explanation of like how this game is different from the first one. And I do think we will get a lot of big story stuff because we're getting a name reveal. The idea behind that is that that's going to have some serious story implications, right? Like, didn't Nintendo?
Right.
I forget which executive it was. Maybe it was Aonuma. It might have been Bill Trinan actually. Not sure who, but there was this interview that came out and said that, hey, look, if we reveal the name now, that would be kind of spoiling the game a little bit. So I think the implication is that if we are getting a name reveal, there is going to be a big story focus with what they're telling us. So I think you're kind of on the money, but I also think we're going to get a pretty good amount of understanding of the gameplay mechanics too. Well, not everything. There's still going to be a lot, and I think a lot of that could be further revealed at the Game Awards. Although I don't expect it to be like a significant thing there. There just might just be like another couple of like extra details, but then release date confirmation maybe, and then we'll get really like the brunt of the details in like a dedicated direct early next year.
I do think if they decide to do a Breath of the Wild 2 focused direct next year, I don't see them doing a lot of gameplay explanations in the first review in September. I don't see that happening. Mostly because I feel as though if they show off, like I do think there's gonna be gameplay, right? In general, like I do think they're gonna have gameplay and they're gonna show off some new mechanics to kind of gain our interest. But I don't see them like having it stay there and then having like the developer talking over it, having Eiji Aonuma talk over explaining things. I feel like if they're gonna have dedicate that much time to the game, they're gonna want to do it at the direct that's focused on the game, right?
So let me retweak what I said.
Okay.
So I think you're right. I think that there more of that sort of conversation, that communication will be done during a direct, but I still think there'll be some words spoken in relation to this game. Like maybe they won't like focus a lot of conversation on gameplay mechanics, but maybe there'll be something said like, hey, we've been working on this for a while. Like there's gonna be some sort of communication from Aonuma to us, to Zelda fans. I don't think he's gonna be vacant from the direct.
I think so. He'll probably show up to talk about how much they've worked on the game and that kind of thing. I could definitely see it being the game that ends the direct as well. Maybe they show off. Yeah, like they show off like the new mechanics, so they get people talking. But it's not so much focused on it. It's just kind of shown within the gameplay, kind of like how we had the trailer before that showed like the new like time stasis.
Yeah, in fact, this is how I think it's going to be positioned, and I could be wrong. Of course, this is all speculation, but
right.
I feel like we'll be getting towards the end of the direct, and then they're going to have a trailer revealing Twilight Princess and Wind Waker HD coming to Switch. I'm crazy, and I think it's coming out September. I understand I could be wrong, but we'll see what happens.
I mean, to be fair to you, we had what was it, Super Mario All-Stars get announced, and then 2 weeks later released.
Yeah. That's why I think it could happen. Like I think it's a very similar situation. Like if those games are actually gonna come as being reported, and if Breath of the Wild 2 is truly coming out in March, how else does it make sense? Because I don't think you wait till January to come out with the games. Like I feel like it's too short of a gap. Like I think you have to have it be like a 6-month gap. But we'll see on that. But anyways, I think they'll reveal them, right? And then Aonuma will come out and say, hey, so yes, Twilight Princess and Wind Waker HD, they're finally coming to Nintendo Switch. I know you guys have been waiting for them for some time. Something to that effect, right? And they'd be like, but I also know you guys have been waiting for also a long time and more news on the sequel to Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Well, we're now finally ready to give you some details. Take a look. Something like that. So nothing super significant, but like a little something. And then we get the trailer, and then we get a name reveal. And Aonuma will come out on stage one more time and say, hey, what'd you think of the title? That's interesting, right? Like maybe like something like a very subtle sort of suggestion to the title and what it may mean. you know, like something very subtle, just food for thought for us. And then stay tuned for more details soon. And then direct ends. Like that's kind of how I think it's gonna happen.
Yeah, I can see that being the case. I see the trailer, like I said, focusing mostly on like story things, showing characters, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
But I do think it's gonna be mixed in with bits of gameplay, showing the whatever new mechanics they have working on over there, and then having Aonuma reveal the title. Yeah, I pretty much agree with all of that. It's definitely gonna be a lot of information, but I think they are going to deliberately not tell us all of the information directly. Yeah.
There's gonna be a lot to digest, though. Like we're gonna get that trailer, and we're gonna be like, I'm gonna be like in full like analysis mode, like, oh my god, this. But actually, on that note, right? Because I feel like we're. Do you have like a different idea for how they may present this information? I know you said you agree with me, but do you have a different idea, or do you want to just kind of focus on like the content of this trailer?
I think originally I wasn't even thinking about like the possibility of them having like a Breath of the Wild 2 specific direct, although it makes sense. Now that you mention it, I do think that if that's the case, if they reveal the game like that in this direct, I think it's almost guaranteed that we're going to get some kind of direct that's like that. Because I definitely do not see them in any fashion talking in depth about the game at the Game Awards. Because that's a lot of time being taken away from the rest of the show.
It's going to be quick.
Right. Yeah. Like I see them just having a hype trailer kind of thing. And then just, that's it. That's Breath of the Wild 2. What do you guys think? And then they move on
like
to
they might
whatever.
show like a trailer or like a quick gameplay segment of Link fighting a crazy boss in the sky. Like it might be some sort of lava dragon or something that's exploding from every orifice on its body. And it just, you know, you see a cool sky battle and then it's like release date, you know?
Yeah, like that. I see that happening. Like
because people will see Link, like, because you've seen those patterns, right? Like those patterns of like Link having the different like stances in the air, like falling backwards while shooting a bow. Like stuff that we've never seen like Link do before. Like that suggests like there's gonna be like some unique combat stuff in the air. And people, to your point from earlier about how like that a more gameplay focused presentation at the Game Awards, people will see Link doing all these cool stuff and be like, whoa, I've never done that in a video game before. That looks epic, you know. And then people will that'll get more people to buy the game.
Exactly, and maybe sell more Switches, which is definitely gonna be something Nintendo wants to happen.
Yeah.
Right. If anything, it's definitely not going to be a place where they go into deep discussion mode, right? So I feel as though if they don't do that in the September Direct, which I don't see them doing, I think you're right that we're gonna see a Breath of the Wild 2 specific Direct where they go into detail on these things. Other than that, I think that's pretty much it. Like I don't see them deviating from that too much. Then again, like we've said before, Nintendo's very good at subverting expectations, so they might not even do a Breath of the Wild 2 Direct at all, even though everyone thinks it would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's hard to say, but you know, let's just focus on what we may see in this Direct, right? We think it's going to be a trailer. What will we see from this trailer? We've talked about how we think it's going to be a little bit more story focused. Like, what details do you think we might actually see? Like, will we learn more about, will we see some voice acting from Ganondorf? Will they confirm that corpse is Ganondorf, and will we hear him talk? Will we get like some exposition from him? Will we see exactly what happened to Zelda? You know, is she alive? Is she dead? Will they use that as a way to sort of explain, you know, what her role is in the game?
See that being used as a plot device. As something to kind of guide Link along, like maybe he's motivated to get up to that castle because of the fact that the last time he saw Zelda, she was in trouble, right? Like I could see that being like a motivation tool in a way.
My only problem is I don't like the idea of Zelda being just straight up a damsel in distress again. You know, like we've already been through this rodeo so many times, and literally this exact same version of Zelda has already been saved. Yes, she had I'm not saying she didn't have any cool moments. Like obviously she protected for Hyrule for 100 years, staving this thing off, and then she dealt the finishing blow to the calamity. Like she's not like a weak character. That's not what I'm arguing. But you know, ultimately, she was the goal. Like Link was trying to get to the castle, to save her, and that's kind of what happened. So if that's basically the same thing again, she falls in a hole that's part of the castle rises into the sky, and she's trapped there with the big evil zombie Ganondorf. You know, oh man, I gotta go save Zelda. Like, that's the exact same situation, right? Like, in a broad way, I would like to think that something a little bit different is happening with her. It may be even the case that we don't even know if Zelda's alive, which could be interesting. Like, maybe part of the story is trying to find Zelda, because you don't know where she is. And what's cool about that is it leaves it open for us to kind of decide, like, okay, is she in the castle, right? Which is maybe like the expectation, like that's the expectation, right? But maybe Nintendo will want to finally subvert those expectations. And as we're playing through the game, we're just learning more clues about what may be happening to Zelda. And as it's further revealed, maybe Zelda's actually alive and she has her own role in the game to some extent. From a story perspective, I don't know if we'll actually play as her, but maybe like she's doing something that impacts the gameplay in some way, you know?
I would honestly, where my mind goes to is that I would like to see something along the lines of like just a much larger Terry Town situation with her.
Yeah.
Where I would like to see her like rebuilding like parts of Hyrule. Maybe there's like different towns she goes to, different areas to rebuild certain things or whatever. That's what I would prefer to see. I just feel like they're gonna end up doing the safe thing where they just kind of use her as like a plot device in a way. I don't want that. I would much prefer like a Terry Town situation kind of thing. Maybe make her playable, but I'm not sure what to expect in terms of what they do with Zelda. It's very rare that we get like a direct sequel Zelda game. Like, it's happened.
It's a little bit of uncharted territory though, because when we look at Majora's Mask, yes, Zelda was related to the story somewhat, but basically she just had to do with like the prologue of the story, right?
Yeah, like very loose.
Very loose. Like she's not directly tied to the events of Majora's Mask. She's just more about Link's backstory. This has a potential to be more than just a backstory involvement, you know, and that's where it's kind of uncharted territory. But I think what they end up doing is largely dependent upon the gameplay direction of the game. So Breath of the Wild is an open air game, and I'm not saying Breath of the Wild 2 won't be an open air game. I believe it will be, but there might be a little bit more linearity to it. There might be more of a narrative focus. And with that, how they use Zelda will vary, right? Like, if this is a game that's very open, just like Breath of the Wild 1, where you can go to the end at the beginning of the game, it may be the case that maybe like an idea like what you express is totally possible, where Zelda's just kind of like doing her thing, right? And it doesn't really matter what you do when. But if there's like more of like this narrative buildup where there's several different plot beats that change throughout the story, like maybe in the beginning you think Zelda's dead, and then halfway through the story you realize she's alive, but then, you know, like there's like a roller coaster of emotion and different events. If it's more like that, then Zelda's involvement in the story will be impacted because, well, one, if we don't even know she's alive, well, guess what? She can't be involved with the story at all in the beginning in terms of gameplay, or you won't know what's going on with her is my main point there.
Right.
So maybe like with this trailer, we'll get a better understanding of if this game's going to be more of an open style in terms of story, more of a linear style in terms of story. It's still going to be an open air game, but there may be more linear elements in Breath of the Wild 2 compared to 1. And I think we'll get a better understanding of that in this trailer.
I do think that if they decide to not, let's say they don't go the linear path, right?
Yeah.
And they decide to keep the game as open as possible, including narratively, I do think there's a little bit of a cool, I don't know, charm to it, to be able to say, okay, look, the beginning of the game, you don't know where Zelda is, what's going on or whatever, right? I think something would be really cool just to like have Zelda somewhere and you could just bump into her. Like, not do it narratively. It's not tied to a narrative. It's not tied to like any real objective. But the game, maybe there'll be like a general objective, like, you know, destroy Ganon was in like the first game.
Yeah.
Where it'll say find Zelda. But I think there would be it would really play well with the first Breath of the Wild's really open way of approaching things. If it was possible for you to explore on your own and then you just find a dungeon of some kind and Zelda's in it.
That's interesting.
Like a concept like that, yeah.
And, thinking about it, though, that gets me thinking, like, what if they take a route that's similar to Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, where in Scarlet and Violet, we know that there's 3 different, like, main campaigns, right? Like, there's challenging, like, the evil team, there's finding rare Titan Pokemon, and then there's, like, the Pokemon League, right? Like, those are 3 different campaigns that you can do in any order, however you want. What if they had something similar for Breath of the Wild, too? And I'm not saying they would be specifically taking this cue from Pokemon, but just kind of like it's how it works out, where maybe one mission, one quest is destroy Ganondorf, like, kind of like how you said, like, what was destroy Ganon in Breath of the Wild 1. But then another is find Zelda. But then another is reforge the Master Sword, because we know it breaks. Maybe you have like 3 main objectives, and each one has its own sort of storyline, and as you progress in those, they kind of, they're all independent, but the game doesn't end until you accomplish all 3.
Right. I can see a situation where certain objectives are gonna just kind of fall under those certain like main categories. Like hypothetically, my brain, when you first mentioned the idea of like having 3 separate stories, was that one of them would be restore Hyrule, right? But I can see a situation where Find Zelda kind of changes and becomes that over time, where maybe hypothetically, as you're exploring, you find out where Zelda is, you find her, and then because you found her, she's gonna start the restoration efforts.
Yeah, so maybe
it's
like the next tier to that quest is it Find Zelda was the first part, and then it becomes, like, to your point, restore Hyrule. Like, I really like that. And maybe it changes again, where you get to Ganondorf and then you fail, right? And there becomes where he takes things to another level, and it's no longer restore Hyrule, it becomes protect Hyrule. And at that point in the game, it's like, holy crap, you're gonna have different towns or cities, and there's gonna be a little bit of a management process in terms of like managing like attacks on towns and cities. Like, imagine how cool that would be, where the world is like a little dynamic. Even more dynamic than Breath of the Wild 1, which makes sense if you think about it. You think they would move more in that direction of making the world feeling more like a living, breathing world, where you have towns and cities that are worried about the environment. Like, maybe there's a thunderstorm that could potentially damage something. And it's almost like the game is creating side quests that aren't planned. And you can go and fix that. Or there could be a Bokoblin camp that's too close to a town, and they attack the town, and you have to manage that in some way. Maybe Zelda is like your Leah or like that middle person that's sort of like the main manager, but you assist her, and she maybe directs you. It's like, hey, look, this town needs help here. This town needs help here. It's all a part of like this big project. Like, first find Zelda, restore Hyrule, then protect Hyrule. And it's like this build up as you are finding maybe the sages or reforging the Master Sword. I wouldn't be shocked if it's both. And that's all in the build up to strengthen yourself to fight Ganondorf. Heck, maybe there's even like a build army level where when you find the sages, like, they have their own like towns and villages, and there's like an actual like, it's a team effort to try and get to Ganondorf and finish.
At this point, you're talking about turning Breath of the Wild 2 into a strategy game. That's the direction we're going into now.
There'll be some level of strategy in there, yeah.
Yeah, like you could kind of have a situation where you have like your, I don't know, 7 sages, 8 sages, whatever it is, and then you can almost put them to certain towns in a way, and like almost like you're hiring them and putting them into defending these locations.
And maybe you have like what were the stones that were used in Wind Waker where you could communicate with the King of Red Lines or Zelda?
I don't remember what they're called.
But you know what I'm talking about. It's something like a Luminous Stone. I don't know if it's exactly the same as Luminous Stone, but it might be. They might have hinted that it's very similar, but something like that. There's some sort of glowing stone thing, and maybe that's what you use to communicate. It's like basically...
It's a phone.
It's a Hyrule phone, and Hyrule phones are rocks, and that's how you communicate with people.
They just come up with some like in-universe reason why there's a second slate or something, and that's Zelda's phone, and then she just calls you up whenever.
It's like,
like, oh hey, this village needs your help, and then you just go.
Our Sheikah friends were hard at work, and they adapted the Sheikah Slate to a cell phone. Yeah. That could explain why we don't see Sheikah Slate in the first trailer, because it became a cell phone and it's in her pocket.
It would also, what would also be interesting is the idea you mentioned where you go and fight Ganon and then you lose essentially, and then it becomes like a protect Hyrule situation. What if that's the first objective and the only objective in the game, and that's how the beginning from that other trailer happens? That's how the Master Sword gets messed up. That's how you lose Zelda, and then it splits into those other objectives, like find Zelda, fix the Master Sword, and
that's all amounting together, so you can beat Ganondorf. And maybe if it's done that way, there can still be those story beats, right? Because maybe in this game you can't actually go to Ganondorf immediately. And I actually suspect that you won't. I don't think it's gonna be like Breath of the Wild 1, where you can go to the end of the game at the beginning. I think that's gonna be a unique thing to Breath of the Wild. Specifically, like if you want to do that, play Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild 2 is gonna have its own feel. And actually, I think it brings me to another interesting point. Going away from maybe some cool story elements or like plot progression, gameplay progression elements, just like the world itself and some of the mechanics. I think we're gonna get a good understanding of how this game is its own thing, and I think this trailer is gonna serve the purpose of finally distinguishing itself from Breath of the Wild, because it's just been called the sequel to Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild officially, and then unofficially Breath of the Wild 2. Like, I think with the actual name reveal, we're finally gonna start calling it something else that won't be Breath of the Wild, and we're gonna actually see gameplay and story that's gonna make us feel that way. Like, maybe we see, like, you know, underwater exploration where there's like a full-on, like maybe the Zora City, we see it there and we see it's changed somewhat since Breath of the Wild 1, but where it's really different is underwater, and there's a whole other level there, you know? Or maybe we can see just like more like ocean exploration overall. Or maybe they continue to expand the sky. Or maybe they just show how much has changed in Hyrule, because last time we saw it, it looked very similar to Breath of the Wild 1. Like, basically, I'm just kind of thinking we're going to see stuff in this trailer that's going to show how much different the world is and the gameplay is compared to 1. Like, we're going to stop thinking of this as just like Breath of the Wild 2 and more of whatever it's called, like Lost Spirits of the Zonai, the Zelda's Revenge. That's going to be a title. Yeah,
it's definitely going to be something. What if it's the same trailer that they give us the name drop, then it's going to be whatever story beat or mechanic that is directly referenced in that name is going to be probably the focus of that trailer. Just to, you know, really hammer that home. And the game does need, I feel, to find a way to differentiate itself from the first game, because you're going to have to find a way to convince people to buy the sequel in some way. And for some people, the fact that you're making a sequel at all is enough. Like, realistically speaking, like, I know that is the case for myself. But not everyone is a hardcore Zelda fan.
I got a stupid idea. Stupid idea. Hear me out. It's stupid, but I also think it's not stupid at the same time. Okay? Right. The reason I think I give like that sort of preface is because I think whenever it comes down to like giving a name suggestion, most people are going to disagree with whatever name someone else suggests for this game. Right? I think we're gonna get the name for this game, and people are gonna be like, what were they thinking? That name's stupid. Because let me tell you something. When I first heard the name for Breath of the Wild, I thought that was a mouthful, and that was weird. When I first heard the name for Twilight Princess, I was like, really? Twilight Princess? Does that, like, at first it didn't sound cool or epic. It was just like, okay, that just sounds weird. You know, like, I just think there's a history of Zelda names seeming kind of awkward at first, but then it grows on us. So I'll use all of this as preface because I'm going to give you a name suggestion that also has implications to the story and gameplay. So, and I know I'm going to be wrong on this, but what if it's something to the effect of like Resurrection of the Lost? Something like that. And that may seem maybe a little dumb at first, but hear me out. Something to that effect I think would be interesting, and maybe there's like a different word combination that is basically what I'm suggesting, but sounds a little bit better. But basically, when I think about that concept, Resurrection of the Lost, there's a few different elements that I think make sense. So one, we lose Zelda in the beginning of the game, based off the first 2 teaser trailers. Maybe she's lost or dead, and maybe like you need to resurrect her. And the reason that this motif of resurrection makes sense is, one, yeah, we can try and resurrect Zelda, but there will be a bit of poetic justice there because Zelda helped resurrect you in the first game. But then also, Ganondorf is being resurrected in the beginning of the game too. But then also, from the first trailer, it seems like they were hinting at a lot of different like spirits being trapped. Like, remember the whole voice thing?
Yeah.
And there's been like this allusion to like Zonai, like ruins and stuff. And there seems to be something helping Link in the second trailer, right? Like that's why we have the glowing light. And then there's something going on there. Like, how did he get to the sky? Right? It seems like something is helping Link. Maybe it's related to that green hand. Maybe there's also like a resurrection of the Zonai tribe, which could be related to like the Triforce of Courage, right? Because I've talked about how like the Triforce is kind of missing throughout all of Breath of the Wild 1. Link never shows to have the Triforce of Courage. Ganondorf is not there, it's just Calamity Ganon. But then Zelda just has a whole Triforce. What if like they kind of go in, they use that as bringing back the Zonai tribe? That's a lot of like has to do with like Link's sort of character arc and building up to having the Triforce of Courage. And then whatever happens with Zelda that leads up with maybe the Sheikah and the Triforce of Wisdom, and then Ganondorf coming back to life with this red purpley energy, and that's the Triforce of Power. Like that's all kind of like brought together. But the idea is simply resurrection different ways. Link is resurrecting the Zonai tribe. Zelda is maybe getting resurrected herself, and Ganondorf is also getting resurrected herself. Like, I know that this is probably not exactly right, but I wouldn't be surprised if there is some level of a motif of resurrection in this game, and they show that to some effect in the trailer.
That's the case, then yeah, I can see that kind of, maybe, like you said, not exactly worded the exact same way, but if they have some kind of common theme, then yeah, I would see them kind of naming it after that theme. I do like the idea, though. I do, in general, like the idea of the overall theme being resurrection in some fashion, since that's kind of what we're all just expecting from the game, considering seeing Ganondorf and realizing Calamity Ganon was basically just his
anger. Yeah, right. Like that's just his angry like armpit like must like that's it. He needs some deodorant basically.
He's got that I haven't showered in 3 months like
except it's like over 10,000 years.
Yeah. So I could see that being the case, like if they want to name it directly off of a motif of the game, especially if you look back at like the other games, it doesn't seem like not often, they typically name something directly based on like one mechanic. It seems like they usually name it off of a mechanic that's also directly tied to like the general theme of the game, right? Yeah,
it's a little bit more vague, right? Like Ocarina of Time. Well, there's literally an Ocarina of Time that you played that impacted the gameplay, but also was a core component to the story, right? Like it was both. Majora's Mask, well, it's paying homage to the whole mechanic of wearing different masks when that impacts the gameplay, but also it's the main villain of the story, right? Wind Waker, it's the baton that changes the wind, but you change the wind because you're traversing the seas, which is also related to the story. Twilight Princess, at first we think it's Zelda, but it actually turns out to be Midna, and that's like that whole component there. Well, I mean, maybe that one's not really too game. Well, I mean, there's the whole wolf element, so you
might have to stretch it a little bit there, but it's mostly. You could make the argument though that like as a wolf, you're basically using her like a mechanic to fight the.
I mean, because she's fighting with you. She's part of. You control her to some extent. Like that part is actually true. And then Skyward Sword, well, you literally point sword skyward for the gameplay, which also is an implication of the story from the sky. Like that's all there. Yeah. So in Breath of the Wild, it's just basically about the world.
Yeah, like that. So
that one's probably the most different, if anything.
Yeah. So if you go by history, most likely it'll be something tied to the story that's also a mechanic that you can utilize in some fashion or another.
Okay, hear me out. Ready? This one's even better. All right, so at first I said Resurrection of the Lost. This one, it's like, this is an improvement on the idea. It still encapsulates everything I said, but then more. Rise of the Fallen. So, think about it. Zelda literally falls. First off. Okay? There's that. But
Okay.
no, there's more. Okay, what's rising in the game? Literally, Hyrule Castle is rising, and it's also a thematically, representation of Ganondorf rising up, resurrection, but also, what do we see in the second trailer? Link having this little warp up ability into the skies, rising up, who's also fallen in battle. And it still encapsulates everything I said before about resurrection and maybe bringing back the fallen Zonai tribe and maybe bringing back Zelda. Like, that's all still there. And it sounds less stupid than Resurrection of the Lost, Rise of the Fallen. Does that sound like a Zelda name, though? It sounds like just like a cool movie. But
yeah, I mean, I feel like most, like you said before you gave the name idea, most names are gonna sound stupid the first time you hear it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe it'll be something along those lines. I just know that it's gonna be something directly tied to like the theme of the game in some fashion or another.
Yeah. That much I think we can agree with. I can continue coming up with names with forever, but
like you can have like the hand of something, or the hand of, I don't know, like something related to hands, right?
What's the mechanical hand that picks things up inside the machine?
Like the claw machines?
The
and
claw. Yeah.
You mean like the claw of the wild? Like what are we going with?
Yeah. The claw from the sky. I don't know.
The claw of the Zonai.
The claw of the Zonai, actually. Hands got like them like claws. So yeah, it's kind of fun. It's kind of fun. Like, whenever we come up with the names, like, oh, that kind of does make some sense. Yeah.
That's why you just kind of throw a bunch of names at the wall and see what sticks.
Yeah, maybe that's how they came up with the name. That's probably how they usually do it. I mean, it's called brainstorming. So
yeah.
Yeah.
You get a bunch of guys in a boardroom together and just start throwing things at each other, right? Yeah. Except they have a lot more context as to like what's going on in the development cycle, right? So,
yeah.
Like, what the game's about.
It's probably a little bit more relevant than what we're saying.
Yeah, especially if they thought it would be spoilery to mention what the name of the game would be. Like it would have, like, I know the first thing people think of when they hear spoiler is story related, but judging by the history of the series, they seem to kind of lean towards whatever is the focus of the game, like the gameplay focus of the game. So maybe they just weren't ready to reveal what that gameplay mechanic would be yet, and they didn't want to, give us a major hint that way.
Yeah. I can keep coming up with names, but I feel like we should put a pin on that. Is there anything else you kind of want to speak on in terms of what you think we might see from this direct in relation to Breath of the Wild 2?
I still do. I want to stay and say that, and like really, how do I put this? I want to solidify how much I believe it's going to be a story focused thing. That's kind of just where I'm at right now. Like I think it's going to be a story focused thing. It's going to have gameplay. It's not going to be focused on it. You might see some new mechanics, but I think the majority of the trailer is going to be focused primarily on story. And I'm really hoping there is some kind of Tarry Town type of thing, because that's one of my favorite portions of Breath of the Wild, and there's a lot of potential for that kind of thing. It was also one of my favorite things in the first Xenoblade, having the Colony 6 situation where you could like rebuild everything. I just like those kind of side quests in games. So the idea of just taking that and rebuilding a much larger portion of the game just sounds ideal to me.
I want to say that the world's going to be a little bit more dynamic, and I have a hard time believing that they're going to see Tarry Town and be like, yeah, let's never do that again. Like, I think that was like the best side quest in the game, right? So yeah, I feel Nintendo listens, right? Like they know what the fans thought of Breath of the Wild. Like, I'm sure they're going to take another look at the weapon management system. They're going to take a look at weather and rain, and I bet they're going to take a look at how they handle side quests and story, and just sort of reassess how they do it all.
I can, now that you mentioned that, I do think it's especially in the direct. I don't see them really addressing it too much in a trailer at the Game Awards, but I could see a situation where there's going to be like a very short snippet in the trailer that's practically dedicated to showing those improvements in those like particular aspects.
I don't know if it happens now. That might happen in like a Zelda Direct later. But
yeah, like I don't think it'll be something where they stop and they explain it what you're looking at. But I can see a situation where oh, they're showing all this cool stuff in the trailer, and then really quick they're showing like him going through menus and maybe using items to repair other items before they break. And just so Nintendo fans would go and see, oh, look, that's, you know, an improvement of something that was, you know, often criticized in the game.
Yeah, I mean, also, like, for example, with the whole rain thing, it could be something as simple as, because now Link has that powered hand, whenever it starts raining, it just offers a glow that, like, gives you, like, a magnetism and allows you to still climb, you know, like, it'd be something basic like that. Like, you could just see Link climbing during rain. It could be like a couple frames of just Link climbing in the rain, you just see his hands glowing from the other hand, and then there we get it. Like, there, you can climb in the rain now. Done.
Yeah, or maybe it's there's more magic in this game, right? And they could use some kind of like enchantment that makes it so that you're able to climb wet surfaces a lot easier, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of things they can do to address.
And they could have a shot where they show like Link like reforging a sword that broke. You know, like maybe you can collect those materials and put it back together, and it just shows more of like more deep. There's like more options with like reforging weapons, strengthening weapons, making them last longer, having more endurance. So the system's still in place, it's just been expanded upon, so you can kind of cater it to more towards your liking. So if you find a weapon you like, you can just strengthen it so it doesn't break as often, or maybe you can do the opposite. Maybe you can make it less durable, but by doing that, it has more strength. Like, and then regardless of it breaks, you can still repair it later on. So they could probably show off some stuff like that real quick with a couple frames. Like that's within reason.
Very curious to know how exactly they want to approach the Master Sword situation on that, because I know they show the sword being more or less broken, but from a balance perspective in the game, like, how do you get people to use weapons other than the Master Sword once they repair it?
I think it's just going to be unusable until it's repaired, which will be near the end of the game. So it'll be basically like Breath of the Wild 1.
So would you think that it would be tied to the story, or would it be like Breath of the Wild 1 where there's like you have to kind of find it in a way?
I feel like this one's gonna be more needed. Like, I think you're gonna need the Master Sword to beat Ganondorf this time around. But ultimately it's gonna be something that's gonna become available late game. And it'll probably have some sort of recharge mechanic, but I also think they'll probably think of a way to make it even stronger, just because I think if the Master Sword broke once against Ganondorf, why won't it break again? You know, so they're gonna have to think of like something they can do to make the sword even more powerful, so it can fend off this strong version of Ganondorf. But I just think that's gonna be a late game thing, and it'll function basically like how it functioned in Breath of the Wild 1, where once you have the sword, yes, it's usable, but it has some level of a limitation, so other things aren't entirely useless. But since it's late game, you know, not a big deal.
Yeah, I could see them having a situation where they have the Master Sword kind of just like left behind at his home or something, or maybe it's at like a blacksmith.
I just think it's just like in his inventory, and he just doesn't pull it out. So? Yeah, like it's you know, like a key item.
Maybe a key item.
It's just a key item that you don't have access to until it's repaired.
I almost want to see it left behind somewhere, though. I feel like it would, I don't know, bring more like possible character interactions if you have like the Master Sword like at his home, and maybe Zelda will be there and comment on it or something like that, or like another character that's probably new to the game. Something. I feel like there's possibility and like, you know,
I'm not opposed to that. I'm not opposed to that happening. I just my brain doesn't see it, at least from what they've shown us, just because Link has it. I mean, it's an early trailer. It's probably from early on in the game, so maybe he does leave it behind. You know, to your point, maybe that does happen. But I guess my thought process is that Link's goal in this game is going to be to reforge the sword, and I feel like he's going to have the sword with him. So when he finds a temple, and we see that. The temple's gonna like power up the sword a little bit, or help to like restore it a little bit, you know, and that's why I don't think it'll be left, unless, you know, maybe there's like, you know, kind of like how there's the Deku tree where the sword is left there to sort of restore over time. Maybe you gotta find places to like put the sword in there for a little while it restores.
Maybe it could also be tied to like your exploration, somewhere kind of like how in the first Breath of the Wild you had the your health and stamina was pretty much tied to whether or not you could explore and find shrines and complete them. Maybe there's something similar to that. Maybe there will be like some kind of resource that you get that is given to you for exploring certain things, and then you would put that into the sword, and maybe after a certain point of getting enough of them, the sword will slowly, come back to what it was before.
Maybe, if that's possible.
I think it depends on just how much they plan to make the story linear, or if they're gonna try their best to keep the game as open like the original was.
So I don't know, because the game's been in development for so long, we don't know how much has changed since they initially decided to greenlight this project, and how much has changed since the first teaser trailer. But with the 2 teaser trailers we have, they both seem to be very early on, which suggests there's a lot of early game exposition, which I would say sort of supports the idea that this is going to have more of a strong sort of linear story, obviously those things can be changed. What we've seen could be a misrepresentation. Remember when we got that final Breath of the Wild trailer in the January Switch presentation, and we saw the trailer and the voice acting, we were like, oh my god, this is going to be the most epic Breath of the Zelda story ever, and it wasn't really conveyed in the way we thought it would be, so we'll see. I do believe there will be dungeons in this game that are more reminiscent of previous dungeons, and I think there is going to be a little bit of a better told story, just because I think they'll take notes from the previous game and they'll find a way to present it differently. I think also because they want the game to feel a little different, and because they already went with Breath of the Wild, they saw all the previous Zelda games and they want to do an opposite. Skyward Sword's the most linear Zelda ever, and they're okay, let's do the exact opposite. I think for Breath of the Wild 2, they're gonna come back a little bit closer to the middle. It's still gonna be mostly open, but it's gonna be not as open as Breath of the Wild 1, just so they can tell a better story.
Right. I think if that's the case, then you'll probably see certain major weapons like the Master Sword, certain major elements be tied to direct story progression.
Yeah.
If that's the case. I can see it be a resource if they decide to keep it close to the first Breath of the Wild, but if you're right and they do have more of a linear storytelling thing, it probably would be tied directly to main dungeon completion or story progression of some kind. How far do you think they'll take the dungeons though? Do you think we'll see the whole 9 dungeons, or are we gonna see 4 or 5? And if that's the case, what is the story significance for them? Because there would have to be some kind of explanation as to why we're doing them.
Well, I mean, I think the story explanation is pretty easy. You need to restore the Master Sword, and in previous Zelda games, when the Master Swords needed to be reforged or powered up, you go to temples and power it up.
Yeah,
there you go.
Sense, yeah.
That's it. Also, there may be a need to rebuild the Triforce, and maybe there's more temples that have that. And since there's been so much seismic activity and things of that nature, they can pull temples out of the ground or from the sky or underwater. I think there's an easy way to fit them in there. So that's, yeah, I think that kind of explains that.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. I mean, part of me wants to say, I want the good story, right? But part of me is also conflicted on it. Because I think the biggest draw to Breath of the Wild was the fact that it was so open. And part of me is okay, I do want the dungeons, right? I do want the more involved story, but I don't know if I want to necessarily sacrifice the openness of the first game, and if that makes sense.
Well, maybe it's kind of there's tiers to it, right? Maybe the world is very open, but you have to accomplish certain tasks, and when you accomplish these tasks, maybe there's 3 temples. At first it's all right, reforge a Master Sword, go to 3 temples. Great, you did that. Okay, now you need to find the sages. So there's 6 more temples, and each time you accomplish certain tasks, there's a major plot point, and then okay, now you have to do this grouping, and so let's say there's 9 main dungeons, right? Every 3 main each main dungeon will have a story that's sort of separate from the other stories, but they're related, but they can happen in any sort of order of time. And then when you do all 3, then there's a big plot point, a big story scene, and then you move on to the next phase of the game where there's like maybe 3 more dungeons. You know, I'm just using 3 as a number, right? You explore those openly in any order. They each have their own individual stories, and then there's a big sort of story moment once you do those 3, and then you move on to the next phase. Like maybe they could do it like that, like the world happens in phases where you accomplish a certain amount of tasks that are done openly, and then new phase where something about the world changes, and it's, you know, maybe things evolve or develop, and that's how it goes. And that way you can still have like a little bit of linear story, but there's still like side stories that sort of intermingle within that, and that's how I feel like you could do it like that.
So would you want like almost like a linear progression for the dungeons themselves?
I'm suggesting semi-linear, right? Like almost like kind of like Ocarina of Time, but more outwardly expressed. Like in Ocarina of Time, the first 3 dungeons I think you have to do in a set order, but then you do the Forest Temple, but then you can do the Fire Water Temple in any order, and then also the Water, and then the Shadow and Spirit Temples in any order. Like imagine that, but on a grander scale. So like, what if like you know, it's just kind of like you can do 3 or 4 dungeons in any order. They each have their own story. Then 3 or 4 more dungeons in any order, more story. 3 or 4 dungeons in any order, more story. You know, like it's like there's an openness that you can still get the openness, but there's certain things you can accomplish that once all of those things have been accomplished, you then move on to another phase in the game. Something about the world changes. It's still open, but you have to accomplish a certain amount of tasks, and it changes again.
Okay. I don't know, but part of me, I'm still conflicted. if that's not surprising.
I don't know what Nintendo's gonna do, right? Like,
right, like, because I think the main draw for me, because we're most likely gonna get dungeons, right? So
there's also probably gonna be like some sort of shrine replacement too. Like there's probably gonna be some mini dungeons on top of that. Like maybe all the sky stuff is gonna have like, you know, something.
Right. Yeah. I think the area I have issue with the idea is I feel the main draw to having dungeons in Breath of the Wild is to have the freedom of exploration to choose to go to what dungeon where. Kind of like what is it? I think A Link Between Worlds had it that way, where you could just kind of go from like any dungeon, whatever point in time, kind of something like that. Because I feel as though a lot of people really enjoyed the openness of the first game, but they just weren't really crazy about the Divine Beast particular dungeon design.
All right, so hear me out, okay? I think 90% of the world can still be entirely open, and they can have some things locked. Having some things locked is not a bad thing. It's how Zelda used to be, and it's how a lot of games are. Like, for example, even the Metro series does it well. There could be some things in the world where you'll see and you'll be like, huh, how do I get there? A lot of it you can find a way to do, but others you'll be like, oh, I can't do anything. But then after a certain point in the game, you unlock something else, and you're like, you're like, oh my god, I could use this to get over there that I couldn't do before. Like, they can do both. Like, what if Breath of the Wild 2 is just more of a proper marriage of both philosophies? It's definitely probably far harder to do in practice, right? Like it's fun to say, it's fun to say in concept, but how does that work out in practice and executed on a grand scale? In a game that's probably a lot larger than the first game, like that's, you know, definitely a tall order, but I don't think it's impossible.
I think it's impossible. I think everyone just has a very different idea as to where that line is drawn between, you know, exploration, what's okay to cut from the exploration side and what's okay to cut from the linearity stuff, right?
Because we didn't talk about this on camera, but like before we started this discussion, we were talking about Xenoblade 3, and we were talking about how like we're enjoying the story, but we're sort of wondering if the story is almost taking a bit of a backseat to the world. And it's just kind of interesting. Like, we're 3, it almost seems like they're trying to kind of like do a better job of the world and also doing the story, but it just feels like with most games, it's one or the other, and it's very hard to do both really, really, really well. Like, I'm not saying both can't be good, but can both be amazing, and that's kind of like the challenge I think most games get. Because Breath of the Wild, from the world, amazing, masterful even. The story, probably just good. You know, as much as I love Zelda, like good's probably like the best it gets. You know, like
I
how do they elevate story to beyond just good while still having masterful world?
Right. It's not a balance that's easy to do, because if it was easy, you'd see a lot more games accomplish this sort of thing. I do think that Breath of the Wild, the first game, did a really good job at still telling its story with the memory side of it. I think that was a really good idea in how to approach that sort of thing. Clearly, that's not enough for certain people. That's why I feel like there is like almost like a spectrum where one side is linear, one side is open world. Where do you fall in between that, right? And everyone has a different idea where they want that line to be, right? For me, I felt like the memories, while you don't get the full story, like you weren't really there,
right?
I do think they did a really good job at like telling a pretty good story without, sacrificing the freedom of exploration that Breath of the Wild had, right?
Yeah, it was definitely they would thought of a way to do it without taking away from the exploration. They would try to do it in a way where it enhanced the exploration, and it worked. It did enhance the exploration. That's
yeah.
They made the world better, but they made the story worse.
I don't know. I would argue that. I feel.
Do you think the story? Well, maybe I'll just ask. We should end this soon, but
we have a bad habit of keeping things for too long.
Yeah, this should have ended a half an hour ago at least. But do you think the world? No, the world's fine. Do you think the story in Breath of the Wild is good? Like, where would you give me a number? I know you're fairly comfortable giving numbers for like how you feel on a game. Like, if you were to give me a number.
In terms of just the story,
just the story, right? We all know Breath of the Wild's a 10 out of 10, so like we don't have to debate that.
Okay.
Unless it's not. If it is, we can save that for another day. But just the story, where do you put it?
If I want to go strictly on story, my mind wants to put it at I'm going 7-ish.
I agree with that.
Around there.
I agree with that.
And here's the thing, though. I feel as though, despite that, Breath of the Wild's story is still, to this day for me, a story I remember more than several Zelda games.
It's also newer.
5 years old. I mean, I played Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword a lot more recently, and I remember more from Breath of the Wild, I'll be honest.
Okay.
And it's not that those games are bad. I'm not trying to, slight those games. In fact, I really like Twilight Princess.
Well, I mean, Breath of the Wild had voice acting.
That does help. The voice acting wasn't amazing, though. It was serviceable. It was serviceable.
Zelda was good.
But, yeah, like, she was pretty good, yeah. And I think what it is just even if the way the story was told wasn't the most involved way, I think having like the world helped in the storytelling. Like you had moments like the King's Diary kind of adding more to the story and giving more context to it. The fact that we know about the Zonai at all tells a lot about the story of like the world Breath of the Wild offers.
Yeah.
But if we're going by just the main story of the champions and everything, I do feel like it is a good story. I don't think it's just... I think it's a good story that was told in a way that it had to be told to service both the world and
like
the narrative.
Let's say the game took place in the past and the story just sort of happened dynamically, right? In a linear order. My opinion of it wouldn't be a 7 out of 10. It might be like an 8, maybe close to a 9, right? Like that's it would be better. But I'm just saying that the way it was told improves the exploration of the world, but it sort of hampers the story itself, the experience of the story a little bit. So, like, what would you prefer? Do you want a game where the world is a 10 and the story is a 7? Or do you want a game where the world is a 9, the story is a 9?
Thing, like, what exactly is making it a 9? Because for me, personally, I feel like if you're going to have 9 dungeons, but you're telling me how to play each dungeon and you're telling me the order in which to play it, I'm not going to like that game as much. That's just how I feel. Like, I do think, like, dungeons specifically, importantly, should be something that is done in any order.
Okay.
I feel like you can give a linear story. I have no problem with that part of it. I think it shouldn't limit the exploration of dungeons.
I mean, I think there's to some extent, there can be certain things that can be done where maybe just your level of progression causes story beats. Like, regardless of what dungeon you do, once you do like 3 dungeons, something happens. You know, like there can be some of that. I don't know, man. I mean, I feel like the tell's gonna tell us what's the best way to go. We're gonna find out to some extent.
We'll see.
Maybe Tuesday or Wednesday.
By the time Breath of the Wild 2 releases and we know everything about that game, we can come back to this discussion and figure out if it was worth whatever sacrifices they made.
Yeah, it's gonna be. We're gonna see. Yeah, we're gonna definitely analyze it for years to come, for sure. All right, guys. Well, that's all for now. Make sure to check out Shifty's channel and his Twitter. I'll have them both linked in the description below. But yeah, check them out. Thanks for coming, man. Any final parting words?
Oh, I just appreciate you inviting me on here.
It's always fun. Always. All right, guys. That's all for now. Take care. Bye.
See ya.